I'm really excited to be able to introduce Laura. Laura and I have known each other for several years now. We met when she took over my role here when I left Te Papa Learning Team about 6 years ago. Since then, we've collaborated on several partnership programs when I've been working at City Gallery and she's been at Te Papa. She brings a wealth of knowledge to share from both her teaching background and her Museum and Heritage Studies diploma. And she was fortunate enough to undertake training in the visual thinking strategies, which she's going to be sharing with us today in Canberra in 2019, back in the heady days when we could travel internationally. So Laura has chosen to take a slightly different structure for the webinar today. She's going to begin by demonstrating visual thinking skills. This will take about 20 minutes, and then there'll be time to reflect on the process and the approach of visual thinking skills, and she'll share some more information about that pedagogical approach. And at the end, there'll be time for questions and discussion, and for you to think about how you might use it in your sites. So for now, I'm going to hand over to Laura.
Nā mihi nui kia koutou, nō rāna nā me weri ahu. He kaiko toi ki te papatonga rewa, ko Laura toko ingoa. It's lovely to have you all here joining our webinar. We're experimenting with a different format. So that's quite exciting, but also a bit nerve-wracking for us. So we'd like to know from you how you feel about the format as well as the content. VTS stands for Visual Thinking Strategies. It doesn't stand for Vehicle Testing Stations. So if you actually just put VTS in your search box, that's what you'll get. So please put in Visual Thinking Strategies, and we will put up some links, of course, to that later on. So when I was thinking about how to talk about VTS, I figured the best way really was to actually show you a session in progress. And so I shouldered out to my wonderful hoamahi, my wonderful colleagues here, who all willingly, with some chocolate as a slight bribe, came along and are sitting with me to actually kind of go through the process. I'd just like to say that they have actually not undergone a VTS session before. They've not been a part of a session. So this is new to them. And the artwork that we're going to be looking at is also, well, it's not new to them, but they do not know the artwork that we're going to be talking about. I wanted to make this as, I suppose, as authentic an experience as I could. So that's why I structured it in that way. But I would like to, before we just go into the session, which will take about 20 minutes or so, I think we should all introduce ourselves. So over to you, Jess. Would you like to start?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Jessie. I saw a couple of you a few weeks ago, so it's good to be back.
Kia ora koutou, kōna kira aho. Kia ora everybody, ko Leanne aho.
Kia ora everybody, ko Leroy tōku ingoa. Kia ora koutou, ko Donald tōku ingoa.
Okay, so folks, what I'm going to do is show the image to the participants, but also you will see the image as well. And there is a link to this in the chat that Mel is putting in if you want to look at it really a bit more closely in more detail. What I'd like you to do is to just observe the process, have a think about as you're observing how you think, what you think is happening, what you think I am doing. What you notice taking place, and also think about maybe how you think it might work in your own particular setting. And we will, as Helen said, have a more general conversation about the VTS session afterwards. So let's just start. I'm sorry, I'm just going to get used to, there we go. Kind of like zooming in and out a bit. Right, so this is how I begin a session with a group of students. Normally, of course, this would be with an actual artwork or an object in the museum. Of course, for this session, we have to do this in a different way. And how we start is we say, first of all, hello, everybody. Welcome. And then I'm going to say to you guys, would you like to spend a minute or so just looking closely at this image in front of you? So what they're doing now is looking closely at the image.
We have a vote, shouldn't
Yeah.
over here.
Ours is there, but what you're seeing here is what we're seeing there.
So it's like a mirror.
Yeah. So I can zoom in to places if I want to. So that's what I'm doing a little bit to give you some more detail. When you're doing this with students, you can say to them, feel free to get up and move closer to the artwork. Oh, which Donald is demonstrating. Thank you, Donald.
I take kids.
Yeah. Okay, folks, that should be fine. I'm just going to zoom out so we can see the entire image. So I'm going to start by asking this question. What's going on in this picture?
It looks like a family portrait.
So you're suggesting that a family portrait is taking place. And what are the things that make you say that what makes you say that in the painting?
Because they all seem like they're posing.
So there's a sense that there's some posing going on here, and so that suggests to you that it could well be a family portrait. Okay, thank you. What more can we see?
There's more people than just them, like there's people in the background as well, which I didn't kind of see until we looked a little closer. Yeah, there's all those people walking down a path, and then there's this guy with a hook. But they all look to be of like, I could be wrong, Donald.
Piper.
Yeah, I was going to say they all
I
look
was
to
gonna
be
say
of Scottish descent because I guess the different types of tartan and the hats and stuff like that.
And everyone knows that Scotland's full of sheep.
Yeah.
So you're noticing, Jess, that there are these sort of primary people, if you like, in the foreground, but there are also some other people in the background there. At the moment, we can sort of guess as to what they might be doing. And you've also suggested that they are of Scottish heritage. And can you just remind us what you said again about why it is you say that?
Because they have lots of different types of tartan, and I guess for us, I think that like it's a symbol. I think the first thing we think of when we think of Scotland is tartan, although they are wearing lots of different types, which is interesting for one family. And then Leanne said the hats as well.
Right, so we've noticed both tartan and some hats that make you think that there is some Scottish heritage being detailed here. Okay, but you've also, Jessie, I think mentioned that there are lots of different types of tartan, haven't you?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, what more can we see?
I can see a ship in the background.
Okay, so you've noticed that there's a ship in the background. Is there anything more you'd like to say about that?
Well, picking up from what Jess said about the people, perhaps they are newly arrived. Maybe that's people coming in. They sort of look like there's some houses at the back. Maybe these are people that have just arrived.
Mm-hmm. So you're suggesting there's a sense of arrival with this artwork. Potentially, no, that's absolutely fine. And and you've noted that, could you just remind me what you were saying about how you get a sense of arrival? What is it that you're picking up on in the artwork?
Well, I think it's the fact it looks like people are sort of a big group of people moving towards houses, and the ship in the background, it looks like they're newly arrived. There's a horse, I think, has a lot of, it looks like it's carrying a lot of things.
This horse here.
And the people in the foreground seem to be carrying a few things. There sort of seem to be some boxes or something off to that far side, things in cages. I don't know that you just go for a walk in the countryside with a bunch of boxes or a cage or things like that.
So you're suggesting that because of these boxes and these cages, that there's some kind of occasion to this, and it could well be an arrival at a landscape, and you're making a connection with possibly this horse that's potentially being used as a way to transport boxes, and you're also noticing this house in the distance, or these houses in the distance,
and the people moving towards them.
And there's a sense of movement towards those. Thank you. What more can we see?
They all look pretty happy.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not that sheep in the background with the
Yeah.
This,
What? A cow?
What?
That's a
cow.
I think that's a cow.
I think
Is that a cow?
is it maybe unhappy because you called it a sheep?
It's white. I don't know. That animal doesn't look very happy
Because it's facing away from you.
because I can tell by its body language.
Maybe it wasn't invited into the portrait.
No, it
That's why it's
didn't bring its tartan.
They seem like they're pretty wealthy because there's a lot of them, and they're very well dressed, and then they've got a whole lot of sheep around them, but they've also got a shepherd standing near them, which makes it look like they might own the sheep, but they don't have to take care of them.
Ah.
So you're suggesting there's some wealth on display here, and if I'm correct, Donald, you're making the connection between the sheep and the land that they're on, the sheep that they're on here, that they potentially own. Is that the suggestion that you're making?
Unless they just borrowed them for the portrait, which is possible.
Unless
To look wealthy, right?
they're
To look
crops, sheep crops. But
And
we're
they
going to go with
they
that.
told the shepherd, it's like, well, do we mind sitting just here in the middle of your flock of sheep? You just turn around. We don't want you in the photo.
Then I guess
Or the
it makes you think a little bit though about audience though, right? So it's like, who is this for? Because if they're sending it back to wherever they've come from, if we're going with the idea that they've just arrived somewhere, yeah, maybe they are trying to find ways to make them look wealthy and better off.
Or maybe they
and,
just like sheep. I mean, there's plenty
Yeah.
of people who would come to New Zealand or go to Scotland and take a photograph, a selfie of them with a sheep.
True.
So I'm just going to move away from the sheep here.
Has typed something.
Oh, yes.
Now, Laura has typed a comment. She's joining in with your BTS session.
Lovely.
She said she thinks that the family is leaving their homeland.
So that's a very interesting point as well. Thank you for that contribution. So we have been talking about it in terms of arrival, but there's some potential for us to view this in terms of departure as well. Just moving away from the sheep for a moment, we were, Jessie, you introduced an interesting idea around display, if you like, that this potentially is something. This painting has been painted as a form of display. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
I mean, back then, right, to get someone to paint a portrait of you, it's not just an everyday thing. I mean, for me, this seems like it's a couple of 100 years ago, and not everyone could get their portrait painted unless you were wealthy. And again, from what I know, it was, you kind of had it done for a reason. It wasn't just like your yearly family photo. You kind of, there was a whole point, because you don't just take a photo, you have to paint the whole portrait. And there's a whole heap of detail as well. So like, I wonder what was the reason it was taken, and the reason why it was taken and the way it's taken, because like Donald said,
They've got chicks.
they're like showing off a whole heap of stuff. You know, they're showing off their tartan, they're showing off the sheep and the chooks and the happiness. You know, like it's, I kind of go, why was this painted?
So Jess, you kind of introduced this idea of display, that there's a question really as to why this portrait, it's a group portrait, has been painted, and what are the motivations for it being painted. You've also brought in the idea that that it takes some money to pay to have your portrait painted. And possibly that connects with some other suggestions about this family being a wealthy family. And then you've asked the question why. So what image possibly is wanting to be shown here? Thank you. What more can we see?
We've got another suggestion from the audience.
Cool.
Rachel says the arrangement is pointing to the father figure, the head of the family.
So thank you for that contribution. Yes, there does seem to be a sort of, if you look at the arrangement, what you're noticing is that possibly that it kind of all leads up into this father figure. I'm wondering if anybody would like to develop that idea further, or whether Rachel wants to say anything more about that. What is it that you notice? What sort of do you notice in the painting that makes you say that?
Yeah.
So so Rachel, while we wait, I mean, feel free to come back to me with that with a further point. But what somebody has noticed here is that, you know, if you look at the height of we assume this to be the father, he's at a higher position, and so potentially what we're suggesting is that indicates an authority figure here.
And most central, everyone's sort of grouped.
And there's also
And he is surrounded by.
And also behind him directly as well, like the background has a lot less detail and is a lot more, is a lot kind of less colorful than like some of the kids and stuff who are in front of a lot of busy stuff going on. And so he's kind of like clearer to see.
So you're suggesting, Donald, that there's a sense of framing maybe happening here, and because there is a certain clarity behind him, that frames him in a slightly different way. Thank you.
It's funny that because of that stuff, we automatically assume that it is a father and a mother. You know, like we just automatically went, oh yeah, it's a father and mother and a family. You know, and no way do we go, could be an aunt and an uncle and favourite nieces and nephews. And I think it's because of that, because of what that person said, is that,
And there's somewhat like a position of intimacy. It looks like he's got his arm around her, I think.
Yeah, I think it's his hand.
Yeah.
But it could be his daughter.
The baby.
Yeah, I think he's got his arm around his daughter, who's like considerably shorter than him.
Yeah.
And then
The wife is the one sitting down.
holding the baby.
Yeah.
We've had another comment from our participants from Motor Education. Somebody has said that the father is at the head, but the baby is at the centre of the painting.
So thank you for that contribution. So what you've noted is that there's possibly some importance to positioning happening in this portrait. So whilst we've been paying attention to the father and speculating as to who this is, that actually the centre of the painting actually appears to be the head of this.
It also looks a little bit like there's kind of 4 boys at the sides as well. So it's kind of like father at the top, and then there's kind of like 4 boys on the sides, kind of framing the thing as well. There's a kind of like protecting, protection like thing, especially because the one who's standing on the right hand side is kind of holding I don't know whether it's a stick or it's holding a stick, maybe even a spear. And then the one on the left hand side is wearing like the full kilt as well in a kind of formal fashion. That's right. And potentially even a dagger at his waist. Yeah. And so there's a kind of there's a dog! And a guy lifting a huge big huge big box with a "See You Jimmy" hat. And clearly pretending to be Scottish, because
carrying.
Only people pretending to be Scottish wear those kinds of hats.
So Donald, if I hear you correctly, you're suggesting that there's something about the framing of these, of certainly the male figures around the outside, as if potentially they're forming some kind of protective. What would you say? Would you say circle, or is that what you're suggesting?
Like they're protecting the people inside their placement. Yeah.
So possibly there's some kind of ring being formed here.
Yeah.
Thank you. What more can we see?
It does feel very staged in that way.
So you're suggesting there's a staginess to it. Could you tell us more about that? What can you see in the painting that makes you say that?
I think it's just like from our assessment of the seeing the father figure like so clearly at like who's taller than the rest and placed higher and is kind of drawn to our focus, and the baby right at the middle and these kind of 4 boys on the outside. It's like they all feel like very deliberate decisions, and I guess that makes sense. If you're going to paint, if you're going to spend the time painting something like this, then you have the opportunity to be able to make these conscious decisions about how these things are represented. But I just think it's interesting the thinking about the kind of artifice used to create that family portrait.
So you're suggesting that because we've kind of been able to detail, if you like, some level of artifice and manipulation, if you like, and deliberation over the positioning, that there is a sort of staged quality to this portrait.
I also feel that it's like it was a last minute decision almost, like to capture it, just by the discussion that we're having, but also looking at like what we see in the picture and kind of how they are placed. Like I kind of feel like it was just let's just quickly capture this just with what we have around us. Like I just feel like it's staged. I feel it's staged, but it's not staged in like a really perfect and professional way.
So you're suggesting that whilst we can see that there may be some staging here, there's also an attempt to make it look unstaged. Is that correct, would you say, by summing you up?
Whether it was intended to make it look unstaged or if it was just a decision to let's capture this. It just kind of looks like it was a last minute decision. It doesn't look perfect. If I was getting a portrait of my family, like I would want everything to be positioned differently.
What is it that suggests that it's less staged to you? Or more
just all the different items that they have around them. It looks like the one on the far left is kind of like just leaning on some crates or boxes. And just how they're kind of sitting, or the one down the bottom is just really relaxed. And kind of what they're holding.
The lamb does not look Kathy.
Cool. Thank you for that. I think we might bring this to a close. That's about 20 minutes, folks, that we've talked about one artwork. And we'll, I mentioned that deliberately, and we'll talk about that in a moment.
One last comment.
Yes, absolutely. Sure.
Rachel Solomon says, if there are different tartans, it's possible they're representing a collection of different Scottish clans arriving or leaving land.
So thank you for that contribution. Yep. So that you're noticing that these are different tartans, and suggesting that possibly that indicates that they are from different families. And another
one.
Yeah.
Rosa says, I think they were posed at different times and not at the same time, and they were assembled on the canvas by the artist.
Right, so there's a suggestion there, thank you for that contribution, that they've actually been painted or drawn separately and then brought together on this canvas. Thank you so much for those contributions. That's great. Now, we're going to wrap this particular part of the webinar up, this session. And what I want to do is to, and feel free please to continue contributing in the chat, but what I want to do is to turn to you folks and actually get you to reflect quite briefly on what you think, how you felt, what you think was happening there and how it made you feel, just generally anything you want to talk about. So yeah, what do you reckon?
Should I start?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, for me, it was like, I wanted to know almost instantly, and maybe this comes from the way that I've kind of been taught about art in the first place. Like, it was really odd to me that you went like, okay, this is this painting, this is the name of it, this is when it was painted. Like, I kind of wanted to know when it was painted so that I could kind of make reference for the dates. But then as we kind of went through the process, there was a part of me that was kind of like, actually, I don't feel like that information is relevant anymore. So yeah, it almost felt backwards at first, but it was nice to be able to explore what a painting was and not be told we were right or we were wrong. Just to have a discussion with friends and be like, this is what we think it is. Like,
It could be that, or
Yeah.
it could be that, or maybe it's
yes,
this.
rather than being like, this is this, and this is what was happening at that time. And because I'm sure there is a story behind it, but actually it's kind of cool to make it up yourself.
Did anybody else sort of like feel that as well? Does that kind of strike a chord with anyone else?
I really like the feeling of being encouraged to make suggestions and notice things. It was nice feeling like we collectively had the time and space to do our own noticing.
And at no point, Laura, did you ever go, "Oh, no," or "that's not right"? You know, it was like everyone's opinion was valid. Everyone was allowed to look at something and say, "Oh, I think this might be this," and I think that's a really nice space where some people might have had different ideas, but it's like, well, it could be. It's a possibility, and it's quite nice. Yeah, it's just sort of seeing everybody's lens or different take on.
And that we would like build on each other's kind of stuff as well. We'd be like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, no, you're right. I see
Yeah.
that. So maybe that adds to this. And it's like this kind of collective understanding. Yeah, working it out together rather than sitting there and going, maybe it's this, maybe it's not. I don't really care. It's like, you're right.
Oh, but now you've said this, now I can see that.
Yeah.
And hearing your repetition of like the things that we were noticing, kind of doubly drawing our attention to things as well. But you're drawing our attention to things that we as a group are noticing, rather than things that maybe you have researched over months and understood deeply about an artist. And only you could possibly have understood that because you're a really smart person. It's like all of us are just here noticing it for the first time. So
And we're not.
any of us who notice something for the first time, that like equalizes the possibility of any of us noticing that and going on that same journey together.
Well, thank you. Helen, there's a
Yeah, we've got
contribution.
another comment. Nadia said that the way that you facilitated that gave each person the chance to expand their ideas.
I agree with that. I really enjoyed the way that kind of we were able to share a thought or an idea we had, but then you kind of helped us kind of either go deeper with that or explore that in more, and just the way that you kind of facilitated those conversations for us to think more about. But then also what we've already talked about, how when one person did something, it kind of, for me personally, it allowed me to kind of expand kind of what I was seeing, and allowed me to kind of go deeper and think wider with what I was actually seeing within the image.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, sorry, did anybody else want to say anything?
I'm sorry.
Don't feel you have to. But, I mean, if you want to say.
I mean, just from an art perspective though, that just made me think about like modern pictures. And I don't know, for some reason why I thought portraits were just as it was, but of course, to paint a portrait, you would get them to pose.
You can paint
And
whatever you want.
You can paint whatever you want without, and it's the same with like pictures. You can take pictures with whatever you want. It might not necessarily be true, but it's like what you're portraying to the viewer.
Maybe there's some form of assumption that because it's old and
It's
someone
true.
painted it, of
Yeah.
course it's definitely real.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not necessarily true.
I mean, I think you've kind of I've got another comment.
Yeah. So Kieran said that they liked the way that you acknowledged and thanked people for their contributions and made them really feel part of the discussion. And Bree from the National Portrait Gallery said that she is enjoying that every observation is based on the visual clues present in the painting, and that you don't need to know about the artist or the era or the intention. It makes the experience both accessible and rewarding for a range of audiences.
Yeah, and thanks, Bree. I mean, I know, Bree, obviously you've actually been through one of my VTS sessions, I know, and so yeah. But yeah, I know, you've maybe been using some of those strategies as well in your delivery. Sorry, I cut
No,
across somebody.
I was completely agreeing. Like I felt like, I think sometimes with art, I don't know about you guys, but I get scared to get it wrong. And, you know, because art is, you know, it is beautiful and it takes a lot of time, and these artists and the stories that they're trying to tell are important to get across. And I think sometimes I can stumble a little bit on making sure that I give the artist enough credit, but actually I felt like my interpretation was just as valid, which was really, really nice to kind of be like, I don't have to get it right or wrong, you know, and it's not, in no way were we ever critical, or not critical, because sometimes it's good to be critical, but, you know, like never not validating who the artist was and what they were trying to do, but it just felt like what we were saying was just as important in the way that we did that. And I thought that was
Everyone's observation
it was a lot
well
less.
done, you have noticed that. Let's talk about
Yeah.
everyone got a chance to contribute, and
Yeah.
no one was told no or you're not right. Made it really safe, accessible space.
Great. Well, I mean, thanks for your reflections, and what you're touching on are so many key points for VTS and how we deliver them. You're right to notice that at no point did we talk about the artwork in terms of its title and the painter. And there's a reason for that. You can talk about it after a session, that's absolutely fine. But really, when you begin a VTS session, the title and the artist and the year it was painted, by the way, this is called The Emigrants, and it's by William Allsworth, that's the artist, and it was painted in 1844 in London. And I'll leave it at that. There is quite an interesting story behind this, but you can all easily sort of like, you know, research that yourselves. But yeah, absolutely, it opens the artwork up to everybody to come in to create their own meaning and to create their own connections to the artwork. And that's really one of the key drivers behind the VTS strategies. Now I'm going to actually start, Mel's just going to load up some slides. I'll just talk a little bit about what happened in terms of the practicalities of the session, and then we can have more of a conversation. And I'm just waiting for that they'll come up any moment. So thanks everybody as well. By the way, I should also say that you always end up with, you know, thanking the participants for their time and their energy. I think you did really fantastically. You're right, you don't say no, but I don't know if you noticed as well that I also didn't say yes, that's right. And that's also crucial, because what you're wanting to do is never to close the conversation down. You're always wanting to keep it going and keep it opening up. And that's really, really important. If I'd have said no or yes, then you might be sort of feeling like, oh, right, okay, well, Leanne's got the right answer. So, I mean, she said that, and now there's nothing more for me to say. So it's really important to do that, to not say no and not to say yes as well. So visual thinking strategies, that's our, like I said, not vehicle testing stations. And then if we go on to the next slide, thank you. I'll just talk briefly about VTS and where they come from. They're over 30 years old, and they originate in the USA. They're very popular in the USA as strategies, and also in the UK and Australia and Ireland. I'm sure there are other places, but I know those are kind of key countries that really kind of get involved with them. I'm really, really interested in them. I did some training in Australia a couple of years back, as Helen mentioned right at the start, and I'm very intrigued as to how they can be used, not just with art, but with in other areas as well. They're aimed at teachers and students. They're used a lot within classrooms as well, and there's lots of research that shows that when teachers use these strategies in classroom settings, that they have really amazing knock-on benefits in terms of the development of language in students, and you know, that's oral and written language. So there's a lot of research to back that one up, and as these strategies have been around for a number of decades now, they've done lots of research. And also it kind of, I think you can hopefully kind of imagine that actually the more you do this, if you kind of practice these sessions a lot in your classroom, then actually kind of develops all sorts of kind of collaborative skills across your classroom as well, and good listening skills too. I'm on that slide. I don't want to sort of, I'll just read it very briefly. I just want you to pull out some key words here though. On the left, it says, we believe thoughtfully facilitated discussions of art make education more engaging, inclusive, and equitable. And then in the blue box, it tells you something about VTS, educational non-profit, student-centered facilitation method to create inclusive discussions. And I'm just dropping down very quickly and saying, it gives people tools to become skilled facilitators of complex conversations, and it's supportive of critical thinking. Now, there are some keywords in there to do with inclusivity and equitability. That's not a word, is it? No, being equitable. Equity is the word I'm actually struggling for there. Yeah. And I think that's where VTS actually comes from a position where you want to really open up and conversations around art and objects, help those conversations to be really, really engaging, not close down those conversations at all. And that actually increases equity across the group. And it really is very inclusive of different perspectives and ideas. It's not saying there is one way to read this artwork. It's saying there are multiple ways to read this artwork, and we're going to listen to them all. And no idea is closed down. The next slide is going to show you the 3 key questions that you would have heard me use. So you start with what's going on in this picture. And there's a reason why this language is used. And it doesn't mean you can't tweak it slightly, but if you want to kind of think about using these strategies in your settings, there are some things you do really want to adhere to. What's going on in this picture? I mean, what do you think what's that saying as a opening question? Anybody?
Like it's things are happening.
Yeah, so there's an implication, isn't there, that there's something going on. There's something to talk about. There's something to discover. So when you're selecting images, that's something to really, really think about. And so it's open-ended, implies there's some kind of narrative to discover, but it does also mean that there's, at the start, there can be a little bit of an uncomfortable wait, because you'll have noticed that I asked the question and I then almost retreat and just like it's over to you. And that can be a little bit awkward, but I recommend giving it a go and just waiting for somebody to come up with a suggestion. Invariably people do. If you do this with primary school students, it happens really quickly and easily. Obviously, the older students tend to get a little bit more inhibited. So there are various strategies I've used, like, for example, getting some partner talk going, or maybe asking a sort of key question about the painting. And in this case, it could have been, for example, who do you think paid for this painting to be painted? There are ways to get through that, to get the conversation going. But once the conversation is going, in my experience, it just keeps on going until, of course, organically it sort of stops, and then you just wrap it up. But if you've got the time, it's quite good to just let it roll on. And certainly, I've spent 1 hour in front of one painting easily, and then had to close it down. So, these things, it's really great. It's really great. Once it's going, it's working really, really well. The next question, of course, is what do you see that makes you say that? Now, sometimes some of you said something and you made reference to the painting. So I didn't really need to stress that one too much. But if you didn't, I asked you to give me the example in the artwork that really kind of like, that's what you were looking at and that's what made you say that. And if you'd said it, I don't know if you noticed, but even if you'd said it, I might have gotten you to repeat it, because it might have gotten buried. Because what you'll have found, what you'll have noticed, those of you tuning into the webinar, is that sometimes conversation just bubbles up. You know, somebody will come in and somebody will go in after that, and I don't get a chance in between, which is absolutely fine. But it does mean you've got to be really on top of the conversation and follow the thread and go back if you need to. Did anybody notice what I was doing in terms of paraphrasing? There was a lot of paraphrasing. So the skill is really in paraphrasing. So I was paraphrasing, giving, if you like, packaging up what you were saying to me. I might have extended the language slightly or the thinking, but in general, no. I mean, the kernel was your idea and your expression. With students, you might think, I want to extend this one a little bit more deeply. So, you know, that's really down to you. But paraphrasing is really important, because what you're doing is you're acknowledging to that person they have made a valid contribution, and that you have heard that valid contribution, and you are, and the paraphrasing acknowledges that. And it also acknowledges to everybody else who is listening that that's what's going to be happening. And that's actually incredibly empowering. It means that people are far more likely to make a contribution if they feel that Laura is going to kind of like paraphrase nicely and hand it back. Then it gives them validity. So it's actually a really, really powerful tool. But the paraphrase, so I would say that's where the skill comes in. And as we mentioned before, you don't say, yes, that's right, and you certainly don't say no. You'd never do that. But it's hard not to say yes, especially if somebody's made a really great comment, you know, and it's like, whoa, you nailed it there in some way. But you have to just try to acknowledge it and say thank you, and then just say what more? And that's the final question. What more can we find? And of course, that implies there is more to be found. It implies that there's more to discover. We can keep on going with this. It's not a question of there's one interpretation for this artwork and Jessie got it for the first 5 minutes and that's it. We're now going to move on. So that's really, really important. The next slide, just quickly what works well. So portraits, group portraits are really cool. That really works. There's an implied narrative with those often. You can use these strategies with even abstract artworks, but I would say that you need to scaffold a lot. And so, but it's really interesting. So I've done a few sessions. I've used these strategies with adults and with a whole age range of students. When I had some art history students at Vic come in, we started off with portraits, but they were really keen, and we moved to move into other areas as well. So we had some fantastic conversations around abstract artworks that you would think, whoa, you couldn't use these strategies with abstraction, but you actually can. And let's go on to the next slide. So using VTS in, the one before that one, sorry, I think VTS in other contexts.
Yeah.
I've got that one up there. There it is.
Yeah.
I've trialed these strategies in Gallipoli, and I sort of moderate them slightly, but I find them quite useful to actually kind of, get people thinking about the fact that these, the large scale figures in Gallipoli can tell us a story. And I think that's what you're using with VTS. You're looking at an image or an object and thinking, can this tell us a story? And if you think it can, then you can use VTS. Okay, and I think we could open this up. Are there any kind of comments here or coming in from the chat? Does anybody have any thoughts about the strategies? And also maybe, I'd love to know if people are keen to give them a go in their own settings. That would just be fantastic, and I'd happily talk to more people if they wanted to about that. So you guys, did you feel, just while we're waiting, did you feel like it was quite an empowering technique? Did you feel like your voices were heard?
Yeah, definitely. I think, and I think it's weird to me that, and again, this could be my education, that it's like, we didn't have to know what the actual meaning was. And that to me just kind of blows my mind a little bit. because it's maybe I'm so used to just black or white, right or wrong. And so it's like, but don't I need to know exactly what's going on? And then the other side of my brain is like, do you?
Yeah.
Or is what you think about it just as important? And that could be tacked on at 5 minutes at the end, if that. But actually, that discussion is.
I'll just come back to, let me just finish off that, Jess, because I think that's really important. I just wanted to say briefly that sometimes when we look at art with students, we're often saying to them, just say whatever you want, anything goes, there's no right or wrong answer. And they do that. And then we say, that's lovely. And then we go in and tell them what we think the painting is about.
Yeah.
And it's kind of closed it down. And I feel like there's a tension there. So this is why I really like VTS. At the end of the session, somebody says, how do you finish a VTS session? Thank you, Grace. What happens next for the students' class? So you can, if you want to, talk a little bit more about the artwork in terms of, the artist and the the date it was painted. And also because people have started to, you'll have noticed within this conversation, started to think about, manipulation of image and that sort of thing. Actually, that's a really fantastic conversation to have with students about the fact that actually, we think about selfies and manipulation now. They've been manipulated for a long, long time, and portraiture is one big box of manipulation going on there, really. And actually, I find that, that is a fascinating conversation to have with students. It's quite eye-opening, and so I would definitely, if I was talking around portraiture, that's where I would go with that one. You might, that could, so Grace, that could be, sometimes I use it as just one tool in my kete, and we might then go off and do, this might be one part of a bigger art explorer tour, and I might have another focus. So sometimes it's just a one tool that I use. Do I find the teachers require the right? Yeah, that's so interesting. Do you find the teachers require the right answer to try and put judgments on the students? That's, yeah, and I have to say, the more you get into the more of an adult a person is, the more likely they want to know the answer. They're almost like, okay, well that was great, but now what's the answer?
Yeah,
I know, and it's really, it's so interesting. I will talk about the artwork if that's what's wanted, but I'm also very, very happy to not go into those kind of details. As far as I'm concerned, the validity is in the exploration that we've all undergone. And you go through a really unique experience where everybody's listening to each other, everybody's building off of each other's ideas. It's actually really quite exciting and dynamic and empowering. And to then kind of like go, all right, well, that was lovely, but actually this, I don't really want to do that. But yes, you're right. Sometimes the more of an adult a person is, the more they're likely to want that. Children, less likely.
That would have like a sense of like competitiveness around it though, like, so.
Was I right?
Yeah. Was I right? How much
Closer
did
to
I
it.
get right?
Yeah.
But then there's this other part of me that's like, you were right, regardless, like that's how you interpreted it, and that's kind of what art is, and there's this part of me that wants to know if I got it right, but then there's this other part of me that's like, and what are you going to do with that information?
Yeah, I think it's really important to maybe then give some really strong validity to the process when you're actually kind of, you've got the students and the teachers and any other adults there as well, is to say that's what this is the process, this is what it is, and so that they understand that it's not leading on to then there's the right answer. This is it, And actually, in general, what I find is that teachers and adults are actually very impressed with the students' thinking. It also, like I said, it sort of opens up diverse perspectives, and you'll get contributions from students who do not normally contribute. And so often I've had teachers kind of be amazed at that. And we all know that's what happens in general when we have students in our different settings, that we allow a space for different perspectives, but it really, really comes out with VTS. Is there anything else that I really?
So there's been 3 comments about different ways of using it in different settings. Nadia Think
Yes.
about using it with some large painted panels about early Māori life in
Cool.
the area.
That would be really interesting, Nadia.
Andrew's going to use it with her staff as a sort of development about inquiry learning approaches, and says that it fits in with the principle of apu, reciprocal learning. And Fiona's
Yes.
thinking about using it with technology objects to illustrate how a past problem has been attempted to be solved.
That's really, really interesting. And I do, I mean, this is actually used in science, medicine, health settings, actually. I did, there's some examples of it being used in Ireland, in Cork, I think, in the, I'm trying to find where it is. Actually, I thought I made a note, but I can't find it. But anyway, they use it for their nurses on their health courses there. And I think what it does is, of course, it links very closely with science, if you think about it, because it's really developing close looking, attention to detail. And really what, that's one of a core skill for a scientist, is that you are really looking very, very closely. And so there are some really nice overlaps between this. It's not just art centered. I think it can be used in other ways. I do find it opens up conversations in a different way in Gallipoli. And I do like it for that, but I'm also intrigued by using it in other spaces as well. I think you could look at, for example, get students to really look at maybe like a kiwi that we've got in Te Tai, or our nature exhibition, and get them to really look at it and think, well, what's the story here? Like, why has it got those? Why is it that color? And why are the feathers like that? And why are the nostrils at the end of the beak? And this kind of thing. Why can't it fly? So it's almost like there's an implied story, there's a narrative that we can unpick if we all look closely and listen.
I think it's really interesting, the practicing of listening skills as well, because of the way that it can be facilitated in a large group, and because it's close looking in that way, that everyone can benefit by the things that individuals notice. Then and it's something that's really powerful with especially primary school age kids. Like, how do you get them to listen to the ideas of others rather than just putting up their hands and like, I have an idea, and then I forgot my idea. It's like trying to get them to actually engage with each other and listen to each other and contribute meaningfully to a conversation that you have as a whole. And that's just valuable in any context.
I think you're right, and that's a really great sort of like maybe note to end on there, is that, what you do find with this is that the conversation bubbles up, and one person will say something, and you can see other people in the, other students in the group thinking, oh yeah, and that makes me think of this. And they then move on. And so it really, really sort of grows organically, but it's actually a really, it's really wonderful to do. So I really recommend you giving it a go. The links are going to be up, and so I recommend going in and looking at that. The questions are very simple and very easy and straightforward. The skill and the subtlety is really in the kind of the way that you sort of paraphrase, and you do have to work hard to not say yes, that's right. And also you do have to work hard to actually step back and let the conversation start without you so much. So I really encourage everybody to give it a go.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was really, really fascinating. And I'm so excited that you chose to do a different format for the webinar today to encourage a sort of demonstration of a theoretical approach in practice so people could see how it works. And I think that's worked really well. And I love the fact that lots of people were contributing in the chat and getting involved in unpicking this image and reflecting on how they can use that in their own settings. So I think that's been really successful. Thank you so much. And thank you to the team for taking taking part. You're all amazing guinea pigs. I really like it. I don't know if I remember to acknowledge the fact that we do record our webinars at the beginning. So we record them, but we blur out participants' faces for privacy reasons, and we save them and upload them onto our YouTube channel and also onto our website. And if Laura's happy, we will also put her slides deck on our website as a resource. So if you didn't, if you wanted to look back on it and refer back to this in the future, or if you have a colleague who couldn't make it to this live event, they can watch it in their own time. Please remember to join us tomorrow or Monday for our focus group hui to tell us more about your professional development needs. And come along in 2 weeks' time to our next webinar, which Monica Kern will be talking about collaborating online and the different tools that you can use for that. So that's in 2 weeks' time on Thursday, the 28th of October, 3:30 to 4:30. You can keep in touch with us by emailing Mel or getting in touch through the Facebook page. We'd love to hear all your comments about how you're finding these webinars. Any feedback is good feedback, so don't hold back on that. But thank you all for coming. Okay, so I'm going to close with a karakia. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapu nui, kia wātia, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairua, I te ara takatā. Koia rā e rongo, whakairia ake ki runga. Kia tina, tina. Hui e, tai.
Bye.
Thank you for coming. Bye, everyone.